Have you failed fast with your advertising efforts on YouTube and given up? Well, many people are measuring it wrong. How much value do YouTube ads bring? In this video, we're going to break it down for you. Specifically, we're going to be going through some key insights that we gathered from the new Haus Analytics study that ran over 190 incrementality experiments on YouTube. I am Matt, speaking to the marketing industry's top talent through the world-class growth agency Jump 450. Today, we are talking to my friend, the managing director of data and analytics at Jump, Tom Murray, and he pulled some key insights for us from this study. So look forward to those and stick around to the end if you're spending a lot of money on Facebook. We are going to explain how to allocate your budget to YouTube.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Tom, let's jump right in. Why are people measuring their YouTube efforts incorrectly? How is this happening? What impact is this happening on the numbers that they're seeing?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people who are measuring YouTube just tend to look at like last click kind of measurement, which YouTube is not really one of those kind of mediums where you would expect to get a lot of clicks, right? You go to YouTube, you're trying to watch potentially hours of content and not leave the site. So a lot of times people are very engaged with their YouTube content, so they might not be interacting with your ad right away. That's not to say ads can't drive clicks or drive conversions right away from your YouTube ads. I know I have myself, but for the most part, a lot of times when you're running YouTube ads, you'll see the performance lag a little bit. And so if you're measuring more like a last click or any kind of click-based measurement kind of setting, you're most likely undercounting your performance severely, which means if you think YouTube is working right now, it's probably working even better than you thought. And if it's not working right now, it might actually be working, but you just need to be looking through it through a different lens.
Right. Tom, so today we're basically breaking down key insights that we have learned from the study that Haus Analytics did with incrementality testing on YouTube. Can you speak to some of the numbers when you say that the numbers are coming back like under? Can you tell us like what is the potential impact that we're missing out on by mismeasuring our YouTube efforts?
Yeah. So House.io, one of my favorite partners and tools that we work with, is all about incrementality testing, and they have basically aggregated over 190, let's call it 200 different studies that they've run on YouTube across the many months and years that they've been an incrementality partner, and they've seen some really strong numbers when it comes to YouTube. Now, you'd expect YouTube to have been growing the past few years. They were $6 billion in revenue in 2021, and now they did about $10 billion in revenue last quarter. So clearly people are spending money on YouTube, right? But they might not be measuring it effectively, and House basically has said, here's how wrong everyone has been when it comes to actually measuring it. So if we think about three different types of measurement, there is last touch attribution, say like a Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics. Then there is what AdWords pixels show, which usually has a click and a view element in it. And then there might be an incrementality test that gives you an incrementality factor.
Right.
So if we look at those three and try and compare them to each other, let's assume AdWords has a return of $1. So the ROAS, return ad spend, is $1. If you were to look at that and say Google Analytics, you'd probably see 5 cents, 10 cents, maybe 20 cents, because a lot of those conversions that the AdWords pixel is seeing aren't going to be last click conversions that Google Analytics sees. So already you're starting at a base of say 10 cents, and let's say the AdWords pixel is $1. Well, House has basically said the average increase or incrementality factor is about 3.4. Now that ranges anywhere from 1 to 10, depending on the brand, but the average has been about 3.4, which means every dollar you're spending, you're really getting $3.40 back from your YouTube campaigns versus the dollar you think you might be getting or the 10 cents that you think you're getting. So chances are the campaigns are doing much, much better than you expect, and they're working quite hard for you. It's just that it's not as easy to measure in like a you clicked and then you saw a result right away kind of approach.
So Tom, what does the term incrementality factor mean within the context of YouTube advertising, and what did these studies sort of reveal about it?
Incrementality factor is more just kind of like a proxy. So if you think of like, oh, I have a specific number, so that $1 number I used before, you're basically saying how much should I factor up or down? Because incrementality is not always positive, right? Certain things are less incremental than others. Good examples like brand search. Brand search might only have a 0.1 incrementality factor, which means for every dollar you think you're making, it's actually probably only about 10 cents incremental. Whereas on YouTube, it's a positive factor. So that 3.4 number I gave you before basically acts as a multiplier on top of your platform reported numbers to try to give you a better sense of actually how the marketing is working.
And what about the halo effect? The halo effect of other channels like Amazon or even in-store retail with YouTube advertising. How does that compare to other platforms like Meta?
Yeah, so a lot of brands are running ads on Amazon or for their products on Amazon that they sell, or they might even have in-store at Target, Whole Foods, Walmart, wherever it might be. And oftentimes those are all thought as silos. So you have your D2C website that you can go on and buy from, go to Amazon, or you can go in store. People do not always buy just from the one place every time. I had a good example where I bought some skincare products from somebody, a couple months ago. I really liked them, but it took like 6 days to ship from the website. I went on Amazon, found that I could get it literally same day for the same price. As a consumer, I don't care where I buy it from. And I don't think people understand like the different costs that a brand incurs for it. So they're just saying, hey, this is going to cost me $15. But to go here, I can get it today for 7 days. Most people are going to pick Amazon. The problem when that happens is you lose the linkage between like that ad click. Because let's say you had the Facebook click and you click on it, or a YouTube click, and you go to the site, and then you eventually buy from Amazon. There's no way to link those things from the click, right? The incrementality testing, though, because it will have access to your D2C sales, it could have access to your Amazon sales and your in-store sales. You can then start to see what happens to the sales in all those different regions when you're running your incrementality holdout test, which, for those that don't know, it's like usually a geo holdout test. So some geographies are held out of your advertising, and then the others, the treatment has advertising, and you can measure those two lifts against each other. And what they're seeing is like the halo effect is quite massive. It's about 1 or 1x on top, which basically means if you have $1 incremental return just on your website, you're probably seeing another $1 just from your Amazon or in-store that you're completely missing. So if your goal, let's say, is $2 to an incremental return, and your D2C site's $1.50, you may think, oh, campaigns are no good. You may lower your ad spend. You might fire your agency. You might fire some internal team members thinking things are bad. When in reality, you're actually crushing that goal, because the real number is probably more like 2.5 or 3 when you take into account that people are going to be buying in other places. And just because we can't measure it so precisely with every single click, it's like people forget that that's possible. And then I always ask people, just think of your own behavior. You kind of think that people are just going to buy from your site all the time, when in reality, we don't do that ourselves. So you always have to put your own consumer self in their shoes, if you will. And then that's how you can understand like this halo is probably happening all the time. And, that's a pretty strong score of 100%. Meta usually, according to Haus, only has about a 50% halo effect. So it has some impact on Amazon and in-store, but YouTube has a much bigger impact generally on those other channels.
So YouTube is performing well, better than people think that it's performing. You're probably making more money on YouTube than you actually realize. These incrementality tests are only revealing that you're measuring improperly, or that you're making more money there. What is sort of the recommendation for this moving forward? I mean, I get that this means like, hey, you should test on YouTube more, but like, how do I sort of like keep a hand on the real numbers here? How do I measure this properly over time so that I can control my efforts?
The key is testing frequently. So even though you run one test, right? And let's say YouTube is 3x incremental, you don't just take that measure and use it for the next 10 years.
Right.
I say that as a joke almost, because one of my old brands I used to work on a long, long time ago did a study like this for display, not YouTube. And they found a very specific result 7 years before I got to in one of my old agencies. And they were still using that result to use their proxy for their incrementality factor at that point in time. There is no way that number has not changed in 7 years, right? So because of that, you always have to do constant testing, right? So you'll always be measuring this in the background with different kind of tests to then make sure that wasn't a mistake. One of my baseball coaches one time was like, if we did something really well on the field, he'd be like, let's do that again to make sure it wasn't a mistake. He wasn't giving us props to be like, oh, you guys did so well that time. He's like, let's make sure you didn't screw up that one time and you got it right by accident. So you need to test this constantly to make sure that the return is still holding. Because what might happen is you might start spending more, right? You're saying, what's the recommendation? Most people might see that result and say, hey, I should spend 50% more on YouTube. Well, every incremental dollar you spend, generally speaking, not all the time, is going to be less incremental than the one before. So if I'm spending 100K right now at say a $5 return, and if I go to 200K, I'm probably not going to keep that same exact $5 return. So you might find there's going to be some diminishing returns at a certain point. So it means you have to scale up test. Basically say, hey, let's spend 150 and see what happens. Because if I spend 100K at a $5 incremental return, I get $500,000. If I spend 150K at a $4 incremental return, I've made 600. Now, a lot of people get stuck on the rate metric, like, oh, I'm at a 4 versus a 5, and they get really stuck to that number. And if that goes down, they think something's wrong. Me, I like to count money in my wallet. So I think I'd rather have 600,000 in my pocket at a $4 return than 500,000 at a $5 return. And sometimes people can't separate those things. So a lot of times you need to understand, like, what's the overall impact to the dollars in the bank account versus what's my, like, rate-based metric. Because I can get you a $10 return if you let me only spend 20 bucks. Or if you only let me target very specific people. But as you start spending more and scaling out, you're going to see your ROAS decline a little bit. And the whole point is, like, where can you get all the way up to the curve where it stops going up and, like, spending there? And hopefully you can find that spot, and that way you're getting the maximum for your money, but then also not seeing any diminishing returns.
Right. Tom, talk to me about the post-treatment window effect and the effect that it has on ROAS for YouTube campaigns compared to, say, Facebook.
Yeah, so the post-treatment window is very important because sometimes you want to judge the campaigns and the tests really quickly. It's a very specific experiment, which means you can't run these for 3 days. Usually these tests are 4, 6, 8 weeks. I've seen them as long as the whole quarter. Right. And the first thing everyone wants to do is, like, what happened? I've been waiting for the results, right? Like, I just need to know how it works. So people oftentimes measure too quickly. This is kind of no different than, think of vaccines or anything like that, where you get a shot tomorrow. You're not protected from whatever that vaccine is protecting you from for a couple weeks. So if you were to measure the effectiveness of the vaccine a day after, or any medical treatment, this is any random clinical trial, which is kind of how these incrementality tests are, like, based on. Mm-hmm. If you measure it after a day or two, you may see no efficacy. You might not see statistically significant results, whatever it might be. You need to wait. So the post-treatment window says, hey, we need to wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And it's different by every brand because it depends on your purchase cycle. Like, if it takes 3 months for someone to buy something and your campaign will only last it for a month, well, those people that got targeted with ads on the last few days, you need to wait the 3 months to judge it. Doesn't mean you can't read it early, but you don't want to read it a couple of days later. So post-treatment window, very important. Now, when you look at that, you can start seeing with the house results that YouTube's return goes up by 80% after that campaign ends and the post-treatment window is applied. So let's say most are usually 2 to 4 weeks generally, which means if your return is $2 at the end of the campaign, it'll go up to, like, $360 by the end of it.
Right.
And then Facebook, though, for example, those only go up like 30, 40%. So your $2 becomes, $260, $270, $280 kind of a range, but they might look the same. So what does that mean, though? Like, let's say you had a Facebook return on the day after the campaign ends at $250 or $225, and your YouTube one's at $2. Some people would say, hey, Facebook did better. But if you will give it some more time, YouTube will look better in the future. So the key thing is that there's a longer lag and a longer tail to YouTube advertising. And that's probably because, which might lead us into the next thing, which is it tends to hit more newer customers than on Facebook, where Facebook is really, really optimizing just to get any kind of conversions. And so because of that, getting all of those lower funnel retargeting kind of customers. Whereas on YouTube, you might be running so many other ads, you might be excluding a lot of those people. And YouTube tends to find a little bit more new customers, which, in House's findings, about 75% or 3/4 of all of the purchases are actually coming from new customers versus returning customers, which means those people are less aware when they're originally getting hit with a YouTube ad, which means, okay, they may not even be ready to search yet. They're going to find out about your brand, then they're going to go search maybe about the category, then eventually they find you, which means there's a longer time in between. So it kind of makes sense that the post-treatment window would show a bigger increase because it might be a little bit more up the funnel than people think. And this sometimes creates confusion because a lot of times the people running the search campaigns or the Facebook campaigns and the YouTube campaigns are all the same place. So they all kind of get bucketed in the same part of the funnel, which is not really the case, right? Search and shopping are really, really down here because people are searching for the exact product or the branding, whereas Facebook might be a little bit higher, and YouTube's probably even higher than that, is what this shows. It's way more upper funnel, generating interest and brand awareness to then actually eventually convert. So if you measure in a last click world, if the purchase cycle is long and they're not aware yet, you're never going to see anything on that side generally, which is why you need these kind of experiments to actually see the true value.
Tom, how do different types of YouTube campaigns perform in terms of ROAS?
Yeah, so YouTube has had a lot of changes with how their campaigns are set up now, right? There used to be like true view in stream, which there still is, but then there's non-skippables, and then there was conversion campaigns, but then they released video action campaigns or VACs, which had some changes, and now demand gen even has YouTube as an element, which probably eventually everything will just be demand gen. Well, they'll have like PMax for everything and demand gen, and who knows, they might combine at some point.
Right.
But what House is finding is that demand gen campaigns, which used to be called Google Discovery campaigns, which is like you could serve across Gmail, YouTube, the Google feed, the YouTube feed, or wherever it might be, a lot of different placements across the board. It's not just only on YouTube as you're browsing. Those campaigns have a higher incremental return by about 27% compared to the video action campaigns, which are just YouTube campaigns geared towards conversions, which kind of makes sense. Kind of doesn't, kind of does. It doesn't make sense because the action campaigns are 100% geared towards driving conversion as fast as possible. Demand gens are probably a little bit more awarenessy. They're probably a little bit more up the funnel. However, the reason why I say it also does make sense is because of that, it's introducing more people to the brand, probably at a cheaper cost in terms of like a CPM and things like that. So you're reaching more people. And it becomes this whole math equation. It's like, okay, could I get a really high incrementality score, but with fewer people? Or can I get a lower incrementality score with more people? So can you impact more people? So if I can get like 50% cheaper impressions from a demand gen campaign than a YouTube campaign, as long as my incrementality isn't lower by that same amount, the absolute impact is higher. So I'm not really that surprised that demand gen is a little bit better from that perspective, because it's probably a little cheaper. And so if it's reaching more people, it has a more chance of potentially getting some people that will eventually buy. And then even when you take into account the post-treatment window too, the incremental return is another 20% higher for the demand gen. So it also has that long tail as well. So there's different kind of campaign types that eventually they'll probably all merge into one. Or people start trying to hack the system and run like TV campaigns or shorts campaigns and things like that, but there's still limited testing on how those all work specifically.
Tom, for people out there that are listening that are spending a lot of money on Facebook, can you give us a recommendation in how they should consider allocating their budget for YouTube?
Yeah, so YouTube budgets, depending on the brand, could be 10%, 20, 30% of what you spend on Facebook, depending on how mature you are as a brand. And figuring out what to do with your next few dollars is always tough. Because if you're spending high on Facebook, let's just use an easy round number, $1 million on Facebook every month, right? If you had another $100,000 to spend, where should you spend it? Should you add that to Facebook and say, oh, I'm going to spend 1.1 million? Or can you put that 100K somewhere else and drive better results? This is where I think people get into the trap when they're not measuring it in an incrementality setting, right? Because they might not see their Facebook or any kind of return go down when they add that extra 100,000, like from what like the pixels say. But a lot of times when you test this in an incrementality, like scale up tests that I mentioned before, you might actually see that last 100,000 didn't actually do anything. And so you spent it to spend it. So sometimes people get in the trap. Let's say your goal is $3 for a return, and you're currently at 360, right? So 20% above the goal. When you spend an extra 100,000, you might not see your return drop that much. Your return might drop to 354, let's say. And you're going to say, you know what? I'm happy with that. In reality, all you've done was spend $100,000 and got no benefit because you spent 10% more and your return dropped 10%. So you really didn't get anything new.
Right.
So when you start blending things like that, it kind of like hides when you add more money, did it actually do anything for me? So what I want people to think about is, if I have 100,000 extra to spend, where am I most likely to get my next incremental dollar from? From that spend.
Right.
Could going from 0 to 100 on YouTube drive more performance than going from a 1 million to 1.1 on Facebook? Probably. Depends, right? Depends on how big your audience is on Facebook. Like if you're going from, I'm making this up, like 300,000 to 330,000, it might not be that way. Depends on how saturated you are and how big the market is of what you're running against. But in reality, you should always be thinking like, is this extra money going to drive me incremental dollars? I feel like sometimes people forget about that and just look at, hey, I'm above my goal, and they're okay with spending up and then watching their numbers go down, but they're still above goal, so they think it's okay. When in reality, you didn't need to spend it. So net of this is, if you're spending a lot on Facebook, which most people are, it's usually the top spender in most people's budgets,
Right.
other than maybe search and shopping, depending on the brand, is can I take that last sliver or last tranche of dollars that I was either going to put into Facebook or any channel? It could be YouTube, it could be any channel. You should always be just thinking about this in general. Can I find a smaller pocket of incrementality somewhere else that might be better spent? The answer is not always yes, but you should always be thinking about that first.
If you are listening and you are interested in exploding your own digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com, and do not forget to subscribe for more weekly episodes. We'll see you next time.